Hi, I'm Alison.
And I'm Taylor.
And together, we're the Anxiety Chicks.
Each week, we will dive deep into a different topic about anxiety and the real-life experiences we all go through,
while giving you all the top tools and tips you need for your journey to recovery.
Our degrees may say therapist and dietitian, but together we are just real chicks on our own healing journeys too.
Join us as we take you from panic to power and reduce the stigma of mental health. Remember, you're never alone and we're all in this together. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Anxiety Chicks podcast. I'm Alison Saponara. I am here on my own today. Taylor has had a little bit of emergency and she can't make it. She will be back, don't worry. Everyone go send her some love in her DMs, but she will definitely be back. And so it is me and myself and I today. And I'm excited to be here as your anxiety healer. And I'm so excited for today's topic because I talk a lot about trauma on my page. I talk a lot about anxiety and its connection with trauma and trauma's connection with anxiety and what trauma looks like. And a lot of people have different opinions about what it means, like what the word trauma means. A lot of clinicians might say, there's capital T trauma and lowercase t trauma, which, give or take, whatever way you want to actually think of the word trauma is fine with me. But I do want to mention that when it comes to a traumatic experience that you go through, no one person's experience is more or less important than another person. Okay, so I want to start with that. Trauma, someone who has experienced a trauma is their experience and it's valid. Okay, so I want to make sure that there's no judgment here, and whatever someone experiences and the trauma that they've gone through, something that creates a really destabilizing type of experience for someone who finds it very difficult to move forward from, creates an intense amount of stress and overwhelm, and it gets stored in your body, it gets stored in your brain. That's trauma. So some examples of traumatic experiences that I've had throughout my life are a couple that recently happened, which was my dad died and I had to watch him slowly kind of like get sick and see that deterioration. And I'm starting to learn about how traumatic that was for me. And I'm starting to work on that in therapy, especially the year and a half that he was really sick. And that he was in an assisted living facility. I talk all about this in other episodes. And just really trying to process through a lot of those memories I still have of seeing him like that, of knowing that there was abuse going on in these homes that he was in, and that he was just a shell of himself, and all of these things that, honestly, when I think about the vision in my brain, like the picture in my brain of what that looked like is so vivid. I have some dreams about it sometimes still. I mean, I guess I could call them nightmares. And, it's been very hard for me to move forward from that. Now, the grief of my dad, losing my dad, was traumatic as well, but I have been able to kind of move forward in my grief of him not being here. But that traumatic experience for the year and a half of seeing him in a certain way and like dealing with a lot of different moving parts and a lot of people that were just very abusive, I will say, physically and emotionally in these homes, assisted living and like rehabs and stuff. That's just like a whole nother story. And anyone listening to this that has either had someone they know that they had to put someone in a nursing home or an assisted living facility or a hospital like that, if you know, it is, at least in the United States, that's where we are. I've been hearing more and more stories of people who just have had horrible experiences with people they love in these homes, or horrible experiences themselves. So anyway, so that's like been really traumatic for me, working on that. And then some other traumatic experiences in my life that I've been through are when I was younger. I definitely had panic attacks when I was little, but no one really knew what they were. So I still remember certain holidays when I would have panic attacks and have to isolate myself, and my stomach would hurt so much, and I would be in school and I would spend the day in the nurse's office, and I had like really bad social anxiety and just other performance anxiety, stuff like that. But one huge traumatic experience is for me, which I've talked about maybe not like so much, but every now and then, is that I was bullied really bad in grade school. So it was more like eighth grade, seventh and eighth grade, I would say. And the memory of just the situation of what they used to say to me, how they used to, what classes I would be in, and they would saying certain comments about a birthmark that I had on my arm. I remember it was a really big birthmark, and they used to say it looked like poop or something, and they would call me that when I would be in the middle of the class and all of this stuff. That trauma I've really worked through over the past 10, 15 years of my life in therapy. And I've been able to kind of move past that. I kind of just feel really sorry for that little girl, who was me. But I am able to kind of move forward. So they used to make fun of that. There was this whole experience in eighth grade where I got in trouble for something I didn't do, and the school handled it so poorly. Adults were really mean to me. It was just like all of this stuff. So that was very traumatic too. And then there's been also other experiences all throughout my life, as growing up with men and with my family, and different fights that people have gotten into that I've witnessed and stuff like that, that are just stuck in my brain. They're in my brain. And my anxiety, like understanding my anxiety as a result from this trauma, and understanding anxiety as the trauma response from a lot of these experiences, is something that I never really tapped into before I started realizing that I had anxiety like 15 years ago, or was diagnosed with it. And so today we're going to talk a lot about understanding anxiety as a trauma response and how it connects to this trauma response. I also, I just want to mention that, if anyone is going through a very difficult, dark period right now due to a trauma, or due to some response with anxiety, just know you're not alone. We're all here together. And if you need some extra support, please, feel free to touch base with us at theanxietychicks@gmail.com. I can help you find some resources if you need them. And also, if you're looking for any therapy, if you're in Pennsylvania, you can email me at theanxietychicks@gmail.com, or you can go to theanxietyhealer.com, and you can find a lot of services I offer, as far as my coaching program and my online courses, how to create your anxiety healing toolkit, how to cognitively rewire your anxious brain. All great, great stuff. And I'm updating my blog all the time. I also just came out with my new book, The Anxiety Healer's Guide for Clinicians. So I do have The Anxiety Healer's Guide, which came out in 2020, which is a wonderful, I think I pulled this out the last time, but The Anxiety Healer's Guide is a wonderful guide for helping manage your mind and body. And it just involves so many different coping strategies and mindfulness-based techniques to calm the mind and body. Some of the chapters we're not going to go too much into this. I feel like I read it, but it's just so helpful. Body breakthroughs, mind tricks to ease anxiety. These are just some of the chapters. Anyway, so you can get the Anxiety Healer's Guide in the show notes. Also, this is really my baby right now. This is really my baby. The Anxiety Healer's Guide for Clinicians. So this is actually on sale now. It just came out this week. You could pre-order it, I think, a couple months ago, but it's available now. And if you're anyone in the helping field, if you are any kind of type of therapist, whether it's a mental health therapist or an OT or a PT or an integrative doctor or any kind of medical doctor, or anyone that works in the medical field that works with people that are connected to helping emotionally stabilize the people in their life and help that and really cognitively change and rewire the brain, this is going to be so helpful for you. A lot of people have been asking me if they can just buy it on their own if they're not using it with someone else, and 1000% you can. There are so many amazing worksheets in here. I love this fact versus opinion worksheet, and about creating your toolkit, the anxiety healing toolkit, and feelings list, emotional awareness, identifying triggers. A lot of these worksheets we can 1000% use on your own. The wording in here is mostly speaking to other clinicians. So it might say, okay, use this with your clients. And if it says that, that's just the way that I wrote the book, but anyone can really use this and anyone can really practice the worksheets in here. These are actually the worksheets I use with my clients. So I send them some of these worksheets to use in between our sessions, and then we process them together. So get your copy. All right, shameless plug. Shameless plug is over. All right, so let's talk about understanding anxiety as a trauma response. One more thing, sorry. Anyone that's watching this, if you love the Anxiety Chicks, if you've been listening, 200 episodes ago, well, I think we're like on 180 or something, please please subscribe and leave us a review and leave us some words of encouragement or some kind words on the podcast. It really helps us get our podcast out to more people, and it really helps us be able to heal a lot more universally, because of course there are so many great resources out there these days for mental health and anxiety, but we'd really love to get our message out there to more people. So we'd love for you to subscribe and review and just leave us feedback. Okay. So let's talk about understanding anxiety as a trauma response. Okay. So this topic is so important when it comes to truly understanding anxiety, right? And anxiety and trauma. When you try and learn about anxiety as a trauma response, you have to figure out that anxiety isn't just feeling nervous or stressed, right? It often goes very, very deep. So for many of us, anxiety can be rooted in our past experiences and how our bodies have learned to cope with all of these past experiences, right? So if you've ever read The Body Keeps Score, that is an amazing book on understanding trauma and what it does to the body and how we cope with it. But today, we're going to explore a lot about how trauma shapes our nervous system and why understanding this connection is really, really key to healing. Okay. All right. So let's start with the basics. When we talk about trauma, we're not just referring to those big life-altering events, right? Like kind of I was explaining before, that's like the capital T, right? Of course, those definitely count, those big life-altering events, but the lowercase t trauma, they can also be the result of ongoing stress or, the anxiety you feel, right? And this might be a smaller, lowercase t type of trauma, but it's just as impactful, right? Like these smaller experiences that accumulate like over time, they're still traumatic and can fundamentally change how our nervous system operates. So let's try and break this down. Okay, I'm going to break it down. I also talk with my hands a lot, you guys. So I might say that like every time since we're on YouTube now. I'm getting used to it. Okay, but let's break it down. So hyperarousal and hypervigilance. Okay, if you've never heard these words, I'm going to explain a little bit about what it means. So trauma essentially can leave us in a state of hyperarousal, right? And this means this is where our nervous system is kind of like always on high alert, right? So we're hyper aroused. We're always kind of like, huh, what? Like looking behind us. Right? What's going on? Where am I doing? All that stuff. And this type of hypervigilance is kind of like a survival mechanism. So it's our body's way of protecting us during times of trauma. But the thing is, when this response doesn't turn off, it can show up in everyday life. So that type of hypervigilance that doesn't turn off basically shows up as persistent anxiety or a feeling of constantly being on edge, right? It's like our body is stuck in this fight or flight mode. And even when there's no real danger present, we're kind of just like stuck in this fight or flight. And this hypervigilance is really, really persistent for a lot of time. It creates this, it makes your nervous system unable to self-soothe. unable to regulate. And there's no real present danger right now, but it's almost as if our brain can't, and our body and our brain can't remove ourselves from that danger that happened through that trauma, right? So that's what the body keeps score is sort of about, where you've went through this traumatic experience, but your mind and your body don't, it was so harmful and painful, and you might have even disassociated because it was just too intense, and you kind of felt like you were floating because your brain was protecting you through it. But then afterwards, when you are safe again, your body like doesn't realize that, and your brain doesn't realize you're safe. So this hypervigilance just sticks and stays around. Okay, so that's part of understanding anxiety with the trauma response. So that's the first part. Okay. Number 2, avoidance behaviors. Okay, so let's talk about avoidance behaviors, because this is very, very common when it comes to trauma and the trauma response connected to anxiety. So another way that trauma manifests as anxiety is through avoidance behaviors. This might look like avoiding certain places, people, or situations that remind us of the trauma. It's basically our brain's way of trying to protect us from overwhelming emotions or memories, right? So kind of like I just talked about disassociation, and the way that that's our brain's way of protecting us when when we're in this traumatic experience. It almost feels like we're floating above ourselves, or it could also be derealization or depersonalization. And it's kind of our brain's way of protecting ourselves, because we really can't conceptually understand what's going on. It's too overwhelming, too painful. This might lead to avoidance behaviors after that trauma. So while avoidance behaviors can be temporarily calming, I'll say calming, or avoidance can temporarily reduce anxiety, often reinforces it in the long run, which makes us feel more trapped by our fears. So that part of the anxiety cycle, if you notice yourself having a lot more like avoidance behaviors, and you're avoiding situations or people or anything that kind of brings you back to that place, that's indicative of anxiety related to the trauma. Okay. So number 3, trauma can also disrupt our ability to regulate emotions effectively. Okay, this is probably something that doesn't come as a shock to you. So difficulty regulating emotions is definitely a sign that trauma has maybe played a part in the anxiety we feel. So this means we I love you guys. This means we might experience anxiety as a way to manage intense feelings like fear, sadness, anger, are really linked to an unresolved trauma. So the anxiety kind of manages these feelings in a weird way, if that makes sense, especially if, the trauma is unresolved. Like we know it happened, but we haven't like done any work or gone to therapy or done anything. If it's unresolved, it really can manifest into anxiety and a lot of deeper feelings like fear, sadness, anger. And for some people, this actually leads to panic attacks. So if you know, you know. And it can lead to obsessive thoughts or other anxiety related symptoms, and can just kind of take over your brain, right? It's almost like our emotional volume is turned up so high. It's almost like it's turned up too high, and we can't like find the mute button. You know what I mean? You can't find even like the button to turn it down. And I actually describe anxiety like that so much when I'm working with clients, coaching clients, and private practice clients. I describe it as like a radio dial, right? People remember the radio. I don't even know. Do you guys know what the radio is? Just kidding. But it's almost like these intrusive thoughts and these like obsessive thoughts and all of these other symptoms of anxiety that you might have. Maybe it's like physical, right? You're dizzy, or your headache, or your stomach ache, or the racing thoughts, or like the what ifs, just catastrophizing. It's almost like those things in your brain are turned up so loud that the other part of your brain that's more rational and logical doesn't even have access. You can't even have access to it. It takes over your whole brain, which is essentially why CBT is so effective, because the cognitive piece of cognitive behavioral therapy helps remove those layers and quiet those thoughts down, and also turn up the more practical, logical, rational part of your brain and makes that part louder. And then also taps into like the part of your brain that should have more self-compassion and more self-love and helps you find worth and validation for yourself. So that's kind of how the CPT works. All right, anyway. Okay. So the fourth kind of bullet point I'm going to say when it comes to understanding anxiety through the trauma response is about intrusive thoughts and memories. So I talked a lot about the memories that I had in the beginning of this episode of my traumas and how they're kind of like ingrained in your brain. It's so crazy because I talk about this a lot with colleagues and with friends and how why does this happen in our brain where I'm 44 years old and the amazing happy times I've had in my life, yeah, I can like kind of review them, but not as much as I can in detail with my traumatic times, right? Like my brain and the trauma I felt in 8th grade, I can recall that story exactly how it happened 30 years later. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. So when you think of intrusive thoughts and memories, there are those intrusive thoughts or memories that seem to kind of pop out of nowhere, right? That happens sometimes. And when that happens, they're often tied to the trauma that we've experienced, right? Those really intrusive memories, the ones that leave us with feeling of fear or feeling even angry or sad or worried, they can often be tied to the trauma we've experienced. And these thoughts can be triggered by specific cues, causing heightened anxiety responses. So it's almost as if our brain is trying to process what happened, but instead of moving through it, we get stuck and then the anxiety lingers. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's really, really hard to know how to move through that because when you have those memories, you can't just take them out of your brain. And then the memory just makes you so anxious. So something that can really help with these types of memories, one of the best therapeutic tools and interventions is EMDR. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, I want to say. I know it's a mouthful, but EMDR is an amazing treatment. And you do want to find someone who's trained in EMDR, okay? I'm hoping to be in another couple years. I'm learning. It is one of the best treatments for anyone that's having those lingering memories or lingering trauma and anxiety. Okay. So number 5, right, way to understand anxiety related to a trauma response is a heightened sensitivity to stress. So this is kind of the last tip just to remember when you're thinking about understanding anxiety when it comes to trauma, because trauma can sensitize our nervous system. And what that means is that it kind of makes us more reactive to stress. So everyday challenges or everyday changes or changes in your life can provoke anxiety responses that feel really overwhelming. All because our body's stress response is on overdrive because of this trauma. It's kind of as if our nervous system has learned to expect the worst, so it's constantly preparing for it. So it's like, yep, I expect the worst, and it's just like preparing for the worst thing to happen. So, listen, this is just a way to understand your anxiety better related to trauma that you've experienced, and know that what you're going through is completely common and normal to people with trauma might go through, and that there is help and there is support and there is treatment for all of this. You're never going to feel, I'm not going to say never, but you're not always going to feel like this. You're not always going to feel like this. There is a way to move forward. I promise. And it's important to remember that understanding anxious behaviors may be a trauma response, right? Anxious behaviors may be trauma responses. And understanding that is a crucial step towards healing. It's not just about managing the symptoms. It's not about addressing the underlying causes and learning healthier ways to cope and heal. It's not just about all of that. Of course, that's important, right? How to manage the symptoms, how to address like what are the underlying causes, healthier ways to cope, right? Creating your healing toolkit, all part of the healing process, all amazing, but it's not only about that. It's not just about that. So listen, because you listened to all of this today, I want you to give yourself a big hug. I want you to be proud of yourself for learning more about yourself and trauma and anxiety and understanding the underlying causes maybe a little bit more after you're listening to this, right? And I just want to say I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. And I want, I want you to not give up. Okay. I want you to really think about this as like a way to move forward, and you're getting really out of your trauma brain and trauma body, and you're starting to do the work. And if this resonates with you, remember, you're not alone. And healing from trauma is a journey. And recognizing these patterns is really the first step, to be honest. I want you to be kind to yourself as you explore these connections between anxiety, trauma, and anxiety and other things. Be kind to yourself. And remember, for more tips and support, make sure you follow me on Instagram and TikTok at The Anxiety Healer. Subscribe to The Anxiety Chicks. Go on Instagram. Follow us at The Anxiety Chicks. Follow Taylor at health_anxiety. Maybe send her a little love note. And we'll be back next week, okay? Love you guys.